Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Goblins and Growlers Podcast. I'm Josh Maltby at Black Cloak DM on mostly Discord at this point. Pretty much just Discord at this point.
Yeah, same. I'm Brandon at Way of Brandalore on Instagram sometimes when I've got something interesting to post, and Discord, and that's about it. And Josh, we have not really a guest, but just somebody else on. Like, Inver's not a guest, but...
Well, we don't often get to have Inver on, so Inver's kind of a guest, a special guest.
I'll take it. You know what? I'm just going to exert guest privileges now, yeah. Brandon. I'm
a
guest for now until I take over the show.
I was just trying to say you belong here. You're not just visiting. You're not poor relations or anything.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Thank you. I appreciate for what Goblins and Growlers has done for me in my guest status lately. Also, you can find me at Inver or Inverlock or wherever, mostly online, mostly on social media. And if you find me there, good for you. Yeah. Bonus experience.
We'll add your socials to the show notes so people know to spell Inverlock with an H and not a K.
Well, the first letter is a mystery as well, but that's a secret. That's a secret.
Josh, what are we talking about?
I was just going to say, if you're finding Inver in places that aren't online, then, don't be weird about it. That's all I'm going to say. So you had a reply. I could see it in your face.
Me? I mean, people are going to be weird about it either way. So, even if you are weird about it and you don't know that you're weird about it, I'll never tell you. So, whatever. you do you, boo.
So what we're talking about today is a little, as we often do, something came out recently, and we got access to it slightly later than the cutting edge news technology groups.
You might say it's a pretty hot book. A PHB, if you will.
Yes, it is the 2024 Core Rules Player's Handbook, which I still hate the name of the 2024 Core Rules because, hey, guess what? They're not all coming out in 2024. Yeah. The Monster Manual will be coming out in 2025. This name is dumb.
It's already
Version
outdated.
5.2.1.
I would have been fine with 5.1. I would have been fine with 5.5. I would have been fine with 6, but it works with 5. All of those things I would have accepted. 1 D&D, I think, was a little ridiculous. And 2024 core rulebooks, so much.
When we had that branding discussion and how they just sort of completely tripped and fallen on how they branded this rollout, I thought of something after the fact. They should have just called it the 10th anniversary edition or something.
That would have been great. That would have been awesome.
Yeah.
If you're wondering what Brandon's talking about with our Brandon marketing update, hey, maybe you should go check out the Patreon at patreon.com/goblinsgrowlers.
Yeah, just as a quick pitch for the Patreon, we do these regular GGP deep dives for every episode of the podcast. We have 1 or 2, maybe 3 sometimes, shorter videos, shorter audios that really go into depth on stuff that we realize we're going to be like a huge digression in the main podcast. So be sure to check those out.
So, all right, let's start things off strong. Let's talk a little bit about what we're all thinking, just at the glance we've taken. Obviously, so full disclosure to people listening, all 3 of us picked up the book either yesterday or today.
That's a lie. I picked it up the day before yesterday.
I have been reading this book since before I was born, I'll have you know.
Yeah.
Okay? And any fallacies in my memory is because it happened so long ago.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Inver. Well, some of us couldn't just ask our Warlock patron to give us access to it before time began.
My Warlock patron was a trial subscription to D&D Beyond that let me access the digital version several days early.
All right.
Wizards didn't just give it to you for free?
No, we did send an email, though.
We'll see if they get back to us. They're pretty busy with a lot of things right now.
Yeah.
So Brandon got to it day before yesterday. I got to it today. So this is not going to be a detailed, in-depth guide of everything that's changed in the book. And quite frankly, I don't know that anybody comes to us for that anyway, because I don't think I've ever read a rule book from cover to cover before.
No, and I gave up a long time ago on the FOMO of trying to be breaking news. on this podcast just because we have lives and other stuff to do. So yeah, this will be kind of us just sort of giving impressions, going through and doing some analysis of some stuff. And we wanted to make sure we had a multitude of opinions. So we kindly asked Inver to come on, and she was
that's the guest status.
But if you said, "Hey, I want to be on the show," we would have said sure. Like you don't have to be invited. You just need to tell us you want to be here.
Do you hear that? Do you hear that, everyone?
Yeah.
See me soon.
Yeah.
More Inver coming to a GGP near you.
Okay. But we're here to talk about the Player's Handbook and all of its fun, delicious new mechanics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to start us off like picking up on threads that I've been sort of tugging at for the last year, really, that they've been talking about this. But like, what do we think people are actually getting from this update? Like, what is materially different with 2024 from the 2014 5e rules that came out that sort of warrant all the hullabaloo about it?
I mean, I think the big thing that I noticed is that there's a lot of stuff in here that pretty much every table I've ever seen was homebrewing for themselves because they were like, well, this is ridiculous. I'm not running it this other way.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's part of the actual core rules.
Right. How about you?
There seems to be a lot more standardization, especially with the melee classes. Like they're all getting some form of maneuver, allowing them to kind of change their combat flavor around, which is great because definitely there are some classes that suffered from a lack of options, which I'm sure we can dive into.
Yeah, like one of the big pre-release, I'm going to say criticisms, maybe with like a lowercase c, about this, that a lot of the sort of the D&D intelligentsia had ahead of time was that, and also with some of the playtest stuff they released, was that we were really seeing so much more added in terms of buffs to all the character classes, like effectively just creating more fun and functionality for people who wanted to play. So like if you're, finding yourself stuck in a situation, like the class you usually play, you find yourself stuck in a situation where you can't really contribute. It seemed whether because of action economy or ranged versus melee or something like that, it seemed like they were trying to address some of that. But the criticism part of it was like, does that make stuff, overpowered? And that's probably, especially with the updated Monster Manual not coming out until 2025, maybe that's relevant. But is that enough? A lot of folks are talking about how the organization for the book is better, and Josh, you could probably speak to that better than Inver or I, because you were actually looking at the physical copy and we were looking at the digital copy on D&D Beyond. But it's got like the rules glossary, it's got like terminology glossary, it's rearranged some things up at the top of the book so you get into like how to play before you start creating your characters, so you've got a little bit more of a foundation.
I don't recall the previous book having this, but the index at the beginning, I don't know why I keep trying to show the camera my book during these calls. It's not a good idea. The index is way more comprehensive and way better laid out. And actually, I've got the 2014, I grabbed the 2014 PHB just so that as I thought of these things, I could in fact check.
Now, for those of you listening to the podcast, we're looking at the index of the 2014 book as compared to the 2024 book, which you can see is displayed in much more concise and smaller font.
Yeah, there's more detail in the 2024 core rulebook index. Like there's more like, here's where you find this specific thing, here's where you find this specific thing. Things that previously you had to flip back to the index in the appendix all the way in the back of the book and be like, where are these specific things that I'm looking for? All of that is now in that front index for the most part. Obviously, there's still some stuff that's like specific terminology that's going to slip to the appendix, but like each subclass is marked inside the index. Each like section of the book, including things like the like not just like where the bestiary is, but like, let's just pull up an example instead of trying to remember examples.
You'd say it's more legible overall.
Yeah, well, like the equipment section, yes. The equipment section is laid out as coins, weapons, weapon properties, weapon mastery properties, armor, tools, adventuring gear, mounts and vehicles, services, magic items, and crafting equipment.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's way more comprehensive than we were getting in the 2014 book.
Yeah. I think that the organizational and sort of in indexing overhauls that they did for this are them just sort of recognizing how many new people have gotten into the hobby over the last 10 years and how putting in a lot more effort into sort of new player or player curious accessibility is going to help them. Because like I played a lot of D&D over the last 25 years, but boy howdy do I hate leafing through all these books trying to find an answer to a question that I have. So and that's just an idle thought I had while we were talking about this, but you know, they probably wanted to make it easier to navigate, to make it less intimidating for new people, because you're always at the table and you're like, oh, what am I supposed to roll for this? Or how am I supposed to handle this kind of situation? And it makes it a lot easier for you to find the answer to that yourself, rather than having to maybe feel foolish, which you really shouldn't do, asking a question of somebody else at the table.
So with all the time that you all have had to digest this book and my lifetimes, what would you say? Is it easier for folks who've never played D&D to get into it based on this book alone? Like if this is the only book that they read, would it be easier for them?
I'm of the opinion that yes, it would be, mostly because the stuff that is the most important for you to make decisions on with your character is now at the front of the book instead of like right in the middle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they were definitely moving in this direction too, but like now the book is basically telling you like, no, seriously, use standard array. Just use standard array. Like it makes it just so much and I evangelize against standard array like all the time, just because like, as I like to say, roll 4d6, drop the lowest is the way God intended for character creation to begin. But if you've never played before and you have no history with it, and they're just saying, hey, let me make it really easy for you to get your numbers so you don't have to worry about a really underpowered, number that you have to find someplace to put, or a really overpowered number that your GM might be like, hey, what the heck are you doing? That alone to me is just a huge boon for a new player, not having to sweat the ability scores so much. I feel like this guides you into the game more than previous PHB editions, even 2014, rather than just being like, here, read it and you'll know how to play.
What about you, Inver?
Wait, did you already go, Josh?
Yeah, I started.
I stop paying attention. I think that it's probably easy for them to understand, but I feel like a lot of the lore got dropped out. So it's difficult to have a full feeling world when some of our standards just aren't there anymore. I get it. It's easier to create a character. It's easier to kind of rely on the rules, and they have spelled it out for you for the most part. But I don't know. Part of what kind of drives you to develop the character in the first place is maybe the existing lore there. Now, maybe you're not like a beginner if you already know if you already know about the Underdark. Maybe you're not a beginner. But if you are and you're starting off now and you're looking at the drow section, there is no way to really know what they are, or even their like basic features. So it's difficult for me to say like, yes, this will get you into D&D faster, but it won't make you in love with D&D quite as fast as the other one.
I think that's fair. And I think when I'm talking about like having the things that you care about be first and foremost, I more mean from a mechanical standpoint. Like when you're building a character, I think the 2014 book having what variety of person you are going to be playing, not what your job is and what you're good at being the first thing, I think that does make a lot of sense. But I also think that ran into issues when people would be like, oh, I want to be this specific variety of character. Like I want to be a variant human, like this and that and the third. And then it's like, okay, great. And they're like, and I'm going to be a paladin. And it's like, oh, well, if you wanted to be like a really exceptional paladin, what you would have done is gone with a slightly different like racial setup and
get out of here, min-maxer. I don't want to hear it.
But my point being, like, you don't want to pick your stats and your species first if you're looking to have something that's like, hey, I have no idea what I'm doing. I would ideally like to have a character that is not going to self-destruct every 3 turns.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm just gonna do my best. Like, you want to know what you're trying to build first. And I think having the class first and the suggested standard array for that class as part of it, I think that's where that makes sense, is making that particular piece of it easier so that you don't bring that to the table and then your GM or someone else who's playing is like, what are you doing? Why is your character built like this? What have you done? What is this? And you're like, I just thought he was a cool guy. I was excited about this.
It's sort of related to what you're talking about, Inver, about like what I'm taking from what you're saying is like it seems like maybe some of the fun has become prescriptive, and like jumping around in our show notes a little bit. That was the feeling I got when I was reading some of the rules around like actions and their pitch for like the 3 pillars and stuff. Because with the 3 pillars, exploration, combat, and social encounters, I thought they did a really good job at the front of the book really talking about that and just saying like, hey, here's the main stuff of D&D. I got a feeling that they're trying to actively shift more away from D&D's gameplay loop feeling so predicated on combat, which it is, and it's always going to be, and that's just the way it is. But they can, they're welcome to try and get people to do different stuff than that, right? But reading through sort of the sections on social encounters and the section on exploration, I got the sense they were trying to like flesh it out, but it did feel like they were trying to be like, okay, if you want to have a social encounter, you have to like your GM will have you roll for influence, or your GM will have you roll for deception or something, almost like they were trying to crunchify the social encounter mechanic. Like, and I'm not saying they're trying to push you in that direction necessarily, even though it might feel like that. I think maybe more is what they're trying to do is create a structure for people who may be newer to role playing to be able to engage in that kind of behavior. Because they do say, and I'm going to keep thinking about social encounters, they do say there are 2 ways to do it. There's role playing or there's ability based. And it seems like they're giving people who are shy about role playing, like they're just sort of naming like, you have this path to be able to participate in this part of the game, and here's how we do it. But to me, who's been playing for 25 years, like it almost feels like they're just trying to turn it less into role play and more into crunch, which I think is not the case. That's just what it feels like. That was a lot that just came out of my mouth. Does that make sense?
I definitely agree with you. I think that, so yeah, it's always going to be combat focused because the abilities are combat focused. And if you were to actually put more value onto what a social encounter would look like, you would have things like a reputation score or influence stats, and being able to kind of manipulate that with certain types of folks. Like maybe if you're part of a guild, right, you have more favorable interactions with said guild. I know that they had that in the previous backgrounds, and I skimmed the ones of this one, so I'm sure that they didn't do away with it. But what I'm getting at is that you would need a certain metric to gauge the success by. That's independent from all the abilities that we've already laid out. We'd effectively be building like another game on top of the game.
Yeah, and they do have like NPC attitudes that the GM can keep track of to help, almost like doing a persuade in like Fallout or Skyrim or something like that, right? But it's really basic. It's not like
once you get to 70, you can romance them and then marry them, and then they can carry all your items for you. Is that how it works?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Now they have 3 attitudes that NPCs can have to your character. And let's set aside for a minute that this is sort of like one more thing maybe that the GM has to keep track of.
That they're absolutely not going to keep track of, but
right.
Maybe if it's a repeat NPC, they'll have an internal balance running.
I will say this though. I'll say this, that they have really the most sort of basic bare bones systems for this that I think could be kind of effective. They have 3 attitudes: friendly, indifferent, or hostile. If you had to guess how you're supposed to apply those, what would you think it would be? Keeping in mind that I said it's very simple.
Well, combat always for hostile, right?
No, you're close though. You're close because if a creature's friendly toward you, you have advantage on your influence check toward them. If they're hostile, you have disadvantage, and if you're indifferent, it's just the straight roll with whatever modifier or anything on there. But again, that's something else for the GM to keep track of, even though it's a small thing, right? And it's still like with the advantage disadvantage on friendly or hostile, it still is like taking a combat mechanic and then trying to spin that off into another kind of part of the game, I guess.
I'm glad that they added it. Sorry, Josh. I guess I'm glad they added it, but like, even wouldn't you do that anyway? Wouldn't GMs do that anyway?
Yeah, and this goes back to what I was talking about like trying to push people towards standard array or being proscriptive about it, right? They're creating a structure and a tool for maybe inexperienced GMs or inexperienced players to be able to interact with these situations. It's not necessarily how I would ever play. It's not how I would encourage new players to play, but then again, I'm an experienced GM and I can help guide them through doing it in a more like role-playing-esque way. I think if we look at it as they added a tool to the toolbox for less experienced people to be able to use, like almost like, you know, if you have a kid, you can buy them like one of those little plastic toolboxes that has like toy saws and toy hammers and stuff, so they can play along with what you're doing without having to have the expertise of how to use a skill saw.
Well, you know, I wish them the best. I hope that these sections helped some GM out there. Yeah. It certainly didn't add too many confines to my gameplay, but hey, who knows?
Right. And I'm not even sure what my opinion is on this necessarily, because I haven't had too long to really kind of sit with it, right? Like, I think it's good that it's there for the people who will use it and it will help them engage with the game. But on the flip side of that, I would never play that way. Like, it's too structured. It's too structured.
The next venture we write is just going to be political intrigue, and we'll have to play test these abilities all in there.
Yeah.
It's also worth keeping in mind that this is the PHB. And most optional rule, like, oh, you probably don't want to play like this because you're a little more advanced. You probably want to do like a rolling DC scale that has like, based on affinity, they get like lower challenge for trying to convince this person of a thing. Like, those sorts of rules are probably going to be in the DMG, not the PHB.
I tell you right now, somebody is at their house with sort of a Beautiful Mind-esque board with like yarn going from pushpin to pushpin, planning out how they're going to overhaul the social interaction system on this.
I'm going to tell you right now, I know for a fact that several GMs out there, including a couple that we know personally, use Obsidian, the note-taking system, for keeping track of all of their factions, NPCs, locations, regions, individual important like magic items, lore, like all of it's in this huge Obsidian. It looks like a star chart. It's insane. But I respect the hell out of it. And as you were talking about like all the red string being connected, I was like, yeah, that's kind of what I'm seeing there.
Yeah, just use the spreadsheet. I
want to take a look at Obsidian. Heck yeah. Sounds like a great tool. Okay, not sponsored though. Not sponsored. We're going to have to...
Well, for starts, it's not made for Dungeons and Dragons or TTRPGs at all. It's made for organizations to keep track of their notes.
Yeah, I used to use Evernote for GMing.
The big thing is that it's not a shared platform. So it's really only useful for one person, which is part of why I think GMs have gravitated toward it, because they're like, my hidden digital Bible of how the entire universe operates.
Listen, productivity trackers of the world, if you haven't picked up on it already, there's a niche here and we can help you serve it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. That's true. Come pick our brains. We will charge only a modest consultation fee.
Yeah. I'm gonna run my next campaign through Airtable.
I'm really excited to provide my next adventuring party with their first Gantt chart.
Your party approaches a waterfall. It's actually a chart that determines deadlines and status for different parts of the adventure project.
I was more thinking along the lines of, here's where you are on the adventure, and here's the first thing the king asks you to do. Now that has to be accomplished before you can go on to the next stage of this adventure. Meanwhile, the deadline, which is the Lich's army, is approaching rapidly.
We have to change the way we're managing this adventure. We're going to have to start iterating different outcomes for it. So quick, roll dexterity, because we've switched to agile now.
All right.
So you guys just offer free pun damage on this show, or do the listeners have to roll it themselves?
That's for all you project managers out there.
I always assume it's a base 2, and if people want to add a D4 to that, then that's at their own volition.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah.
3.
So getting back to the book, I think the big idea is, this is something Brandon and I have been talking about at length, which, welcome to this part of the conversation, Inver, is that the 2014 rule books came out literally 10 years ago. And so this is really meant to be the thing that people who are about to get into the hobby, who are maybe like turning 11 or 12 soon, and are like, I want to like roll dice and play pretend games with my friends, but I don't want to be at a playground playing pretend games, because that's for little kids. I want pretend games with rules.
Yeah.
Like, they're going to look at something from 2014 and be like, well, isn't that kind of old though? Like, I was 2 when that came out.
Yeah, I had a question in our show notes that was, is this truly beneficial or just a cash grab to keep the product cycle alive? And the answer is yes.
It can be both.
That's what I mean.
It's allowed to be both.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that they're definitely building off of the momentum over the last couple of years. There are things that we saw with the races, aka species, which have got some serious changes. And I think the homogenization of the classes is probably overdue. We have certainly seen different levels of builds, min-maxed builds or power builds that have exploited the ever-living crap out of the current rules as written. So, sure, some changes probably did need to be made.
Yeah.
And I do think this opens up a lot of opportunity for things like with the maneuvers for martial classes being better able to, wizards get to do like, all right, this turn I'm going to freeze the ground in front of all of our foes, and then I'm going to rain meteors down on them from the sky while they're slipping around on all this ice. And marshals are like, I hit them. And then I hit them again. And then I hit them again. And then, because of my special class ability, I'm going to do all of that over.
Yeah, it's like you're playing Tekken and you get like a 10-hit combo or something like that.
Like, I can see why stuff like that felt like a necessary addition, because there is a lot of like really fun and interesting narrative things that casters get to do that marshals get to like maybe come up with some stuff, but it's not in the book.
Yeah, oftentimes when I'm playing like a melee martial character, the only times I can really get creative is when I was like, oh, well, maybe I can throw something instead. Otherwise, I'm like, well, I'm just going to hang back here so I don't die.
For most marshals. Yeah. I think that the paladins have... I haven't paladin. We're not going to talk about paladin. For sure, it is flavored up. It has flavored up the barbarian and rogue to some extent. But I think fighter always kind of had that ability to do something interesting with their turn, at least with their superiority die, and kind of spending that in a way that could be more flavorful, like disarming the enemy in front of you, taunting. That said, I'm excited for more maneuverability for the marshals, because they certainly deserve it.
All right, what do we want to tackle next? Because we've got just sort of a lot in this sprawling notes document here, and I know we said before we even started recording that we weren't going to get to it all.
Well, early in the book is the new character sheets.
Yeah.
Which I'm excited about because they're finally 2 pages.
Yeah. they're a lot cleaner. They're really not going for any kind of flair or flash with them or anything. I like the spell list they've got on the back there.
Is anyone going to lament the traits, flaws, bonds, and ideals being removed?
What are you talking about? I'm not familiar. I'm not familiar with that part of the character sheet. I don't think, if it was there, I don't think I've ever used it before.
It's something that I found to be mildly helpful for the brand new role player. And the trouble is, I did not find it to be particularly helpful for the brand new role player to actually lean into their character, because they'd be like, oh, well, I don't really know what I'm doing with these, so I'm just going to make stuff up. And then they'd be like, my trait is that I'm greedy, and my bond is this creature I stole, and then my flaw is that I don't like to work too much. And it's like, all right, no, greed is a flaw, not a trait.
Yeah.
The bond that you've set is a creature you abducted. Am I understanding that correct?
Yeah. Well, and like, I don't want to bust on people who actually tried to use those, but the way I always tended to approach character creation was like, I wanted to sort of discover parts of the character as I played them, and so I didn't write it down, like that kind of stuff initially, and I just tried to discover it through play. So there's nothing wrong with not doing it that way, but just for me, it was like I could be using the space on the character sheet for other things.
I do like that all the spell stuff fits on the second page.
That's huge. That's so huge.
Well, and
if only because printing cleric spells takes 10 pages once they get to level 9.
I'll tell you a secret that's not really a secret. For our public games, when we bring pre-made character sheets, though a lot of the standard ones we have, I specifically chose them because they didn't have massive spell lists that came with them. Because like a cleric would be like 9 pages, and it was just absurd. And so like I would rather just roll up there with like 6 fighters, 6 rogues, 3 bards, and maybe a druid or something. Just
remind me to
trees.
do an we should do an oops all marshals night one night just
that would
to
be
save
fantastic.
some ink. It's when we're low on toner.
We should have a glass cannon night too, where it's just like oops all mages.
Yes, excellent.
Also putting the skills alongside the abilities they relate to, like so many custom character sheets have done, including our own.
Yeah, including Goblins and Growlers custom character sheets.
Because we were like, this is terrible. Like, this is so hard to read. Like, I understand you like it being alphabetical, but very few people are like, man, you know what I wish is that all of the skills were in a drop table. That's what I wish.
Yeah. I don't have like a clear image to share of one of our character sheets that like shows that, but it was one of the things I loved about it, how everything was just grouped together as opposed to like that 2-column mess on the old regular character sheets.
So I know we don't have any room for it on the character sheet, but you know what I would have loved is just like a little character portrait panel. Like we have this tiny appearance box, and I guess I can type in quick details, but I'll just have to make my own for that. Small gripe, but a gripe nonetheless.
Yeah. Well, I'm only pick a class that doesn't have a ton of features, and then just use the other half of the class features box for the portrait, or get a Post-it note that you can stick on top of it.
Hear me out. Cover letters for your character.
That's called the backstory, Josh.
Yeah, right.
And players are already doing it, and it's 10 pages long, and they need minimized.
Right.
But yeah, exactly. But like the GM, you're like a hiring manager. Like I don't have time to read 10 pages of a backstory. I need a concise, like 3-paragraph cover letter that reads like, greetings, Guildmaster. from the first time I picked up a sword,
adventurer.
Yeah, from the first time my father handed me a sword in my youth, I knew I would go out and become an adventurer. And then they go through all their achievements. They're like, I achieved level 6 at age 20, like well ahead of my cohort. And then at the end, it's like, I look forward to talking to you about this adventuring opportunity. I feel like I could add so much value to your party.
You don't need to list your 4 years of experience as a customer service coordinator at the prancing gallant. I don't know what noun I want to pick for that. We'll say paladin. The
prancing paladin.
Yeah, the prancing gallant paladin.
Is this an establishment?
Yeah, that's the name of the establishment. We don't need the 4 years of you as a customer service coordinator there, because we understand, based on the responsibilities you've listed, despite all the fancy language you used for it, that you were in fact serving behind the bar. Yeah. Like, we get that. You don't have to fancy it up. Like,
yeah,
we're adventurers here.
This has been advanced hiring and onboarding. I'm going to write that down. I could probably use that at some point for something.
Brandon is going to start offering his professional GM services, and any of you who want to sit at his table are going to have to prepare your cover letter in triplicate, have your resume on hand, and your character sheet and backstory drafted so you can consolidate it into one streamlined application package.
But yeah, the shorter you can get that backstory, the happier I am, because...
must have cover letter. Limited backstory. What's the max, Brandon? 5 page?
I will not read your application without a brief cover letter, and it has to be a brief cover letter.
What you really want is an introduction to the party that's like an elevator pitch for what can your character bring to the adventure.
We met in the Shark Tank.
Just so everyone's aware, the cover letter is not mandated by the player's handbook. This is just a Brandon thing.
Yeah.
It's
not even really a Brandon thing. Like, I think you're slandering me.
It is now.
We were talking about relevant things, and then that happened.
You know what I like that was reintroduced into the book?
Yeah.
You know what I'm really jazzed about?
What's that?
What is it?
Bloodied is making a comeback. Bro, I didn't like a lot of things about 4th edition, but there was one thing that I really liked.
And it's about bloody time.
It was about the ability to tell my players when there was like a sliver of hope on the horizon.
Yeah.
Sometimes I like to draw. You don't have to tell the players everything.
Yeah.
You certainly don't have to tell them they're bloodied when they're bloodied. But if the players were to ask, hey, does it look bloodied? You could say yes, right?
Yeah.
You could say yeah.
Yeah, like, I think a lot of GMs from 4th edition games that I've heard, listening to actual plays and stuff like that, tend to treat that kind of stuff as like a video game, which in fairness, 4th edition was designed as a video game that you play with pen and paper pretty much. So that's the only thing I don't like about that term, is sort of how it was deployed most of the time by people. I think the way you're talking about it, making it more natural to the gameplay, is crucial on how you apply that, rather than you strike him with your sword, and you do 12 damage. Okay, he's bloodied now. Which is basically okay, there was a phase change in the boss. We're almost done.
Oh, yeah, let me be clear. I would not do it for trash fights, right? If these are just randos that you're fighting in the alleyways, absolutely not. It does not matter. If this is a big boss, then yeah, sure, I would like to give that kind of sliver of hope when it's necessary to keep them engaged in the fight and keep them fighting. That said, it does tie the GM to the core stats that are written for the monster, or at least ties them to keeping track of it, to the point that they have to make that judgment call and say okay, well, now it's bloodied and I know how much damage you've done. But the card counting player at the table would also be able to interpret how much damage was done up into that point, or approximate it. Maybe they're writing it down. Who knows? And then bicker with the GM once that threshold isn't reached post the bloodied call.
Yeah.
Right. That's my fear.
Yeah, card counting is illegal in Vegas, and stat block counting should be illegal at tables. The way around that is to just, when they're well, this, that, or the other thing monster has this many
You said
HP.
it was bloodied 4 rounds ago, and it
Yeah.
has been another 4 rounds, and we still haven't taken the monster down. So are you adding hit points to the monster?
No, I made my own stat block, and in my head I'm saying the change I made to the stat block was adding a bunch of HP and leaving everything else the same.
We at the last Unplugged game I ran, we had a surprise round where the players dealt so much damage in the first 3 turns of the surprise round that I was like, I'm gonna go ahead and just add some HP here.
Mm-hmm.
But that was well before I would have described the creature as bloodied, not because the creature hadn't taken that much damage, but because no one was going to ask me, like, how are they looking on the first 2 turns of combat.
Right.
Yeah, if it turned into like one of those road trips where they're asking, are we there yet, every round, like, now you're just asking for 5 more hit points added to the next round.
Yeah, I'm going to drag this out. I'm going to make this awkward and look you in the eye the entire time I'm doing it. Force you to acknowledge me.
Oh man, it was supposed to hit 0 hit points, but what's that? It got back up from the ground. How did that happen?
It looks like now it looks like it was written in pencil, but I assure you this has been there the whole time. This creature does have the rejuvenation ability.
Uh-huh.
And has been regaining points the whole time. No, the table kept joking.
Everything undead fortitude.
Oh god. The table kept joking. They were like, he's adding a 0 to the monster block. And I was like, I considered adding a 0. I decided to add a 1 at the front of the HP.
Mm-hmm.
And even with that, they, like, before the end of the first round of combat, like real combat, that creature was still down. I was like, nah, you know what? I'll give it to y'all. Y'all did a ludicrous amount of damage very rapidly. I'm not going to be upset about that. But I think the big thing is, like, when it comes to bloodied, I think that's just another thing where it's a tool for GMs that don't know that much about what they're doing to be able to go, hey, you know what? Like, you guys have done a ton of damage to this creature. It is looking like you've done a ton of damage to it now.
Mm-hmm.
And the players can then go, okay, I do not need to continue burning my highest capability, most powerful spells, all of my abilities to survive this fight, because there's probably another fight coming up after this one.
Mm-hmm. And no long rest.
Not a G&G games.
Yeah, no. This isn't on our notes, but I just thought of this as you were talking about that. You know, when the DMG comes out, like in a couple months, I'm guessing, like, just based on how the PHB has been structured a little bit, I think we're going to find a much more useful DMG in terms of what its actual purpose is, which is to show people how to be a GM. I always felt like it sort of failed at that, like going all the way back to 2nd edition as like an instructional text. But if they're providing these tools, and like I was calling it like structuring the fun derisively, but like if I wanted to be charitable about it, I could call it like helping hands to help people, you know, get their sea legs on either playing or running. So I'm betting that the DMG is going to be a lot more of sort of an educational text than we've seen in the past.
I look forward to it. Tell me what else I could be doing better.
Yeah.
Speaking of doing things better, they changed the resting feature for a long rest, because I don't know any GM that still uses spellcrafting components, and similarly I don't know any GM that still penalizes players for long resting out in the wilderness as opposed to long resting in an inn or like in a comfortable resting position. And like normally that comfort resting would give you full hit points. Now they're just giving full hit points away for any long rest. So, you know, you sleep in the puddle of that of the last monster's remains that you just slaughtered, like perfect long rest for you. I don't know. It's a good change, I think, in my personal opinion, because I don't think any other GM was really splitting the hairs before that.
Yeah. Well, it's a question of like, because, you know, some people, their initial reaction to those kind of rule changes is like, oh, they're making the game too easy. But Like, are we making the game too easy, or
are you collecting bat guano for that fireball, dude?
Yeah.
Like, come on. Like, how far are we going here?
Yeah. Are we making it too easy, or are we just sort of acknowledging the way people play the game and are incorporating that into the actual rules? Like, ultimately, and it goes back to my Star Wars argument, right? That, you know, once as people could have hated the prequels, and, you know, George Lucas was not happy with how people handled Star Wars after he sold it and everything. But even before he sold it, when he still had it and he was releasing Star Wars movies into the world, like, once you let go of something and put it out into the world for consumers to take and sort of make their own, like, it's not yours anymore. Like, you may own the IP for it, but, like, it's not just your experience anymore. And I feel like that's where we are with this PHB iteration. It's like Wizards acknowledging, like, okay, this is how you actually use this. Well, we're not going to be jerks and force you to use it in a particular way. We're going to just sort of take the lesson of how you found the path of least resistance to play this and just incorporate it into the rules, which I like because those quote unquote harder rules still exist if you want to use them.
Right. Yeah. If you want to be a sadistic GM and have your party members keep track of rations, like, you can absolutely 100% do that.
Mm-hmm.
That strikes me as, even then, something that's going to be in the new DMG, not in the new PHB.
Yeah. I want to make sure we have plenty of time to hit the hot takes from our Discord community. So I just want to make sure we leave enough time for that. But what else?
Weave them in. Hey, what's our Discord saying about this, Brandon?
I've got one from Glocken that I'm going to save till the absolute end. And if you see that in the notes,
because he's the favorite.
No, it's because I really like his hot take. It was very spicy. But like, just going through a couple of them, like Glocken says, I love the structure. I love the easy to read page layout that makes it a better reference book. And I think the art's gorgeous. All that stuff is true. We've touched on some of that. I've just not bought it because I currently don't intend to update to 5.5e. I'm just tired of WotC. I didn't copy and paste everything from the Discord comments, but he was just basically saying, like, I'll play Pathfinder 2 if I want something crunchier, and he's got options for other sort of lighter rules game, and I can respect that. Lost Limey saying, looking at the preview stuff, it looks like everything got some buffing, but the PHB Ranger got less buffed than the other basic classes, so it's still left behind. Hunter's Mark still being a concentration spell and not a class feature. ...
Oh, rip to Ranger. Seriously, This is the least loved class out of all of them.
Yeah. Artifact RVA says, I don't agree with WotC corporate bullshit, and with all the added little nugget of the fact that the uppers are okay with AI usage, I probably won't switch to the new book, which is sort of a meta commentary just on Wizards of the Coast in and of itself.
That's also commenting on Chris Cox once again.
Yeah.
CEO of Hasbro came out and was like, oh my God, yeah, me and my friends all love AI. Like, we're using AI to build character backgrounds. We're using AI to build NPCs. We're using AI to build, like, sections of our adventures. Like, it's great. And I think we should be doing more of that with Dungeons and Dragons, which is like, I feel really bad for everybody working at Wizards of the Coast that's like, hey, don't worry, fan base. We've kept AI out of everything. You don't have to sweat it. We've taken care of it for you.
I mean, read between the lines, and he's basically talking about they're building AI GMs for the Sigil project, like mining the 50 years of content that they've got the rights to probably remix stuff with like retrieval augmented generation. So
I bet it still sucks.
Do we know what model they're using?
I don't. This was what
it would be interesting to see an AI model just trained exclusively off D&D content is what I'm getting at, as opposed to like the plethora of people's non-consented works out on the internet. But I mean, if it was something that was tailored to just D&D lore, I could see that being something incredibly useful for like a glossary.
Here's how I see it working. Here's how I see it working based on my knowledge of retrieval augmented generation. You'll have several different databases of different things from, and let's say this is all from historical D&D properties that they have the rights to. You'll have NPCs and dialogue trees that go with them and things like that. You'll have treasures.
Factions.
You'll
have the Obsidian API linkage.
Yeah, you'll have monster encounters, etc. And when you tell Sigil, generate me a campaign, it's going to have modules that it pulls from where it's like, okay, here's your introduction that we're going to use. Here are the characters. We're going to have a couple of these scripted encounters. Then we're also going to have some random encounters. And it's just going to remix stuff because all RAG does is remix things. Like the insurance agencies use it to parse like really complex documents. Lawyers do it too. And it's if like leveraging that for something like this makes business sense, especially since there's a supply and demand issue with GMs, and if they can create a robot GM for their VTT, I don't see why they wouldn't try. That doesn't mean necessarily I want that to become the norm. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out, though, if they do it the way I described. Well, it's
going to be 90% combat encounters. We know that, right?
Yes, because Project Sigil looks to me like Diablo.
It's going to be 90% combat encounters, and it's going to have just that wafer thin tinge of racism running all through it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh no, how are they going to check? Okay, we're getting off topic.
Yeah, by the way, Wizards of the Coast, please don't forget our kind request to get review copies of books. Yeah.
Look, they know that their old content has racism in it. There's a reason why Dark Sun hasn't gotten anything new published.
And they were able to realize and correct all those things so quickly over the last 30 years. Real quick, I want to knock out these other hot takes. Breck says, my DM is letting us update to 2024 stuff or not as we choose. Basically, the restriction just being that if we take a feature that keys off some other unique new feature, we obviously have to take that too, etc. My only change for my Warlock was that he now gets the expanded spell list as spells known, which is, a win for you if you're playing a Warlock. Drayden saying, my hot take, one wizard subclass should be specialist and give you a breakdown of the benefits you get for specializing in one or two schools, not sure which would play better, opening up the other subclass slot so you can bring back scribes/lore wizards. Which I guess you could still add that, like nobody's limiting us to any certain amount of subclasses, but I guess he was just talking about using them having them specifically shown up at the PHB. And then Glocken again with his final hot take was, why get the new PHB if WotC is still going to be a bunch of scared little bitches on the Ranger class because of worries of synergy? Shots fired. Magic missiles fired.
Something Glocken has said for a long time that I pretty strongly agree with is that nerfing classes because you're concerned that people will take a multi-class dip is a bad way to balance your game. Because quite frankly, if people are worried about multi-class dips being overpowered, multi-classing is an optional rule. It does not need to be part of your game.
Yeah.
And if someone is min-maxing to death everything they're doing, you can just be like, no.
Speaking of multiclassing being an optional rule, there was nothing in the new PHB that specifically said it was an optional rule. If you look up multiclassing, it just treats it as the de rigueur.
What?
Yeah.
And just because Josh isn't going to say it this time, this is also something that's going to show up in the DMG.
Yeah. Yeah, it says multiclassing allows you to gain levels in multiple classes. With this rule, you have the option of gaining a level in a new class whenever you advance in level. Instead of gaining a level in your new class, doing so lets you mix the abilities of those classes to realize a character concept that might not be reflected in a single class. That is it. Doesn't say it's optional, and then it just goes into more class-specific character creation stuff. So,
yeah. You are correct. There's not anything in here about multi-classing being optional.
We've blown the lid off of it.
So I guess 2024 core rulebooks say multi-classing is just a rule.
Next time your GM tells you can't multi-class, haul out that new PHB and just shove it in their face. And be like, sucks to be you.
Do we still have the page 1, you are the GM and everything you say goes? Did they leave us that bastion of peace at least?
Well, that's in the DMG.
Yeah, exactly. You have to wait. You have to wait until November to get that authority from them. One thing I want to hit before we're done is just that, as expected, the Artificer is not included in this player's handbook, which is kind of disappointing. They had been saying very clearly that it would not be, and Jeremy Crawford was like, it didn't feel like something universal to all D&D worlds. Which, like maybe I can get that. I guess maybe an Artificer doesn't feel home in Greyhawk or a Dark Sun or something like that, or Ravenloft. But Ravenloft can be a lot of things. But I just thought that was interesting that that's the reason. I feel like the real reason behind this is we're going to put the Artificer in the first supplement book that we release under the 2024 rules, and you will pay for it again.
I have an argument for why you wouldn't put the Artificer in the PHB in general.
Heresy.
Where's your magic item table? You ain't got one. You got nothing.
Put it in the book.
This is already a 300-page book. You're going to add an entire magic items section?
Well, I mean, okay. No, bear with me.
It's in the DMG,
here.
right?
Yeah, it'll be in the DMG. And all that leaves is a 2-month gap. And during that 2-month gap, people could get magic items from the old book.
Look, if the Artificer is not in the DMG and is in fact in the first supplement book that they sell, then yes, I think people will have every right to be like, hey, what the hell, man?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, because he also said, it's going to be reintroduced in the future, and, quote, there are fun new things in store for the Artificer. And
interesting phrasing.
And
balancing out in the first place.
Yeah, and the S in things was spelled with a $, which I thought was really weird on his part.
Real quick thing before we close things out, because I know we're basically out of time.
What? We didn't even get to the classes.
I know. There's so much to talk about.
I need a lightning round.
Classes speed round.
Okay.
So quick thing. Psi classes, psychic power classes, are back, and I am so afraid. There's subclasses at least, but this has never gone well. It's literally never gone well. They've tried 6 times, and it's never gone well. And
we have a Psi class in Warrior and one in Warlock, right? Because Cthulhu had to get some psychic abilities, which I'm not sad about whatsoever.
They've got a psychic abilities class, I think, or subclass in just about every class.
Rip.
Yes. I'm so afraid.
Your psionic rogue. My psionic ranger.
Okay. My biggest beef is that Twin Spell is absolutely being demolished for sorcerers. There's a bunch of great buffs in the book, generally, but sorcerers got done dirty when it came to Twin Spell. You have to now, it only works with spells that you can cast on multiple targets at higher levels. So that means that these single target spells being twinned for a separate target isn't going to work anymore. So that means that your haste is out and your twinned fireball is out. And I have to ask the question, why? Is it because twinned was just too much? I mean, if that's the case, let's just add an extra sorcery point for anything that does damage over a certain threshold. But I digress. It's fine. It's I'll just never play a sorcerer. That's okay with me.
Rogue's got some cool stuff that I'm excited about. The cunning actions, I think, specifically the what is it called? The something strikes. Cunning strikes?
Let's go with that.
Whatever strikes. I don't care about the name. The function of it's cool. You get to spend one of your sneak attack dice anytime you're doing a sneak attack successfully. And in spending that sneak attack dice, you get to do things like poison the target, knock them prone.
That's cool.
Little fun functional things. There is one of them, admittedly, you have to be level 14 before you can do this. You spend 6 of your sneak attack dice to knock someone the heck out for a minute.
Nice.
Wow.
They do get a Constitution save to resist it, but if they fail, they're out for a minute or until they take damage or are shaken awake.
I don't see a lot of knockout abilities. Like, yeah, we have sleep, sure, as a spell, but like I don't normally functionally the player has to say non-lethal damage, reduce that thing to 0, and then get the knockout.
Yeah. I would have liked to have seen that available at a lower level. Maybe with some disadvantages to it or something like that, just to make things a little more fun. For like lower level infiltration parties or something like that. That could be pretty cool.
Or maybe a knockout if you deal enough damage in one strike to reduce to like a quarter hit points or something like that.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
There's some other fun stuff like a second story work feature for the more steely rogues where you get to use dexterity for your athletics score for determining how far you can jump.
Nice.
Which is kind of cool.
Yeah,
so
that is.
Little fun
parkour?
things. Yeah. Hell yeah, parkour. Well, you already had acrobatics, but now you can also be like acrobatics and leaping from rooftop to rooftop like Daredevil.
It's going to be really great when the heavily armored members of the party don't make that jump.
All right, what else do we have in the lightning round?
Did you have a class that you wanted to talk about, Brandon, before I take it over with wizards? Because I have one wizard update.
I ended up having to spend most of my time compiling the rest of the show notes document and looking at all the other non-character rules. So go wild with wizards.
Okay, I also have a thing for cleric, but and druid. Okay, I like the casters.
Just make your way down the list.
Wizards, we're gonna go up. Have new abilities to swap their spells out midday, which is wonderful because I don't know about you, but I prepared them spells before, and then I realized that everything was immune to fire damage, and now my spell list is not great. It's limited, so you can only really swap out one spell at short rest, one prepared spell at short rest, which is kind of good enough if it's like a big enough spell that can sway the difference. And you can reselect your cantrips on a long rest, which is cool because I feel like wizards should have that ability anyway. I mean, why should I be locked out of casting Ray of Frost if I didn't select it at the beginning? It should be accessible. So good. Yay for wizard privilege. They're definitely the only classes that can do that. For cleric, my other favorite class to play, we have upgrades to the turns, which is super exciting because I don't know if you've ever had to turn a swath of undead, but it's based on a CR rating, and it's not always the most intuitive to perform at the table. And certainly as a new player, it doesn't make any sense at all. So what they've done is that they've changed the flavoring to be more like the sleep spell, where you have to roll a certain number of hit dice, and then it impacts the number of hit dice within that radius that you're trying to cast upon. So it's a bit better flavor-wise. Also, some reactions are super useful for warcaster clerics. Nuanced. And it's that the reaction buff that they get when they can either cast a spell or you can hit, right? If you have warcaster feat. Now it doesn't just matter if the attack of opportunity is triggered by a hostile creature. It could be triggered by a friendly creature, meaning that your party members can move away from you, and that'll give you an opportunity moment, I guess we'll call it, an opportunity moment to heal them. Which is kind of clutch, giving a little more actions to cleric, but still no arcane recovery for cleric, which, rip. We'll see it in the next 10 years, I think. Rest for life.
I have a quick thing for warlock that's not written down here, so I suspect you weren't about to talk about it, which is invocations for cantrips now affect all of their damage spells. Like you can pick a cantrip that's not Eldritch Blast if you really want to be good at Acid Spray instead.
I'm hoping we're going to see more than just the Agonized Blast, Eldritch Blast combo. Hex, sorry, I forgot Hex. How could I forget your third spell that you have on your sheet? I think warlocks are still really limited. I would love to see them have a little more spell power and give them a little bit of variety because you're kind of locked in once you choose it. But I think that the new Fiend patron of Night Hags is pretty freaking interesting, and I would love to explore that more.
And they get half their spell slots back on a short rest now.
Yeah, all one of them.
Well, at first.
my last gripe.
more.
My last gripe is druids. We're still using the individual unique stat blocks for all the animals and familiars that they can turn into, which is just bananas. It's just ridiculous. I don't understand why they all have to be something different. I haven't checked this book, but I know that the last book said that it was on the GMs to provide the stat blocks, and I'm really hoping that that didn't migrate its way into this newer edition.
I think it said that you can find some basic stat blocks on your own to provide. I think that's what I recall seeing. Now, the thing I will say on this, and you and I may disagree on this, and if so, we can always disagree later.
We'll fisticuffs later.
Standardized, there is a land form and a air form and a water form for druids. I felt a little too World of Warcraft for me. I wasn't about it. I agree that druids should have less of a like, oh, you're going to be a rat? Okay, you get exactly rat stats while you're a rat. That's ridiculous. But I don't love it being like, oh, okay, here are the 6 forms of your land form that you can be. Like you could be an owl bear or a regular bear or possibly a buffalo. All of them have the exact same ability stats and everything.
What would a griffin?
No specialization.
What would a griffin be? Because it can fly, but it's also a 4-legged animal.
It'd be air.
I might give it owlbear stats, yeah.
Okay.
But you give it some flight. Just add it.
That just seems like a real gray area for that. Because, like, what would a frog be?
Do y'all suppose that they're ever going to do like those kind of very class-specific books again, like they did in 3.5? You know, they had ones for the cleric, and it was all kind of like spell deviations and different ways to build out.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I've got my 2nd edition Thief's Handbook right back there. That had like it was archetypes and backgrounds before we had archetypes and backgrounds.
I just wonder if the standardization is kind of beat that out of the classes, maybe.
Consider there is an opportunity here, given the homogenization of character classes and things like that, to do supplement books that are like similar to the Glory of Giants book, where it's like, oh, we're going to highlight giants and all the things that are cool about giants. They could do a book like that, but it's for clerics.
Mm-hmm. Do one for rogues. It's called The Glory of Crime.
Clandestine crimes.
I think that's mostly all the classes I care about.
Yeah,
that's fair.
I will mention that like fighter just had like, you know, we talked about this at the beginning, but it just had like a bunch of stuff like added to it to make it a stronger class. And the one thing I wondered there was like, is that to make it sort of a sexier choice? Because I always regard it as sort of the basic class. And after you get more experience playing, like maybe they're like, we gotta keep people playing fighters. Let's give them some incentive for it.
I think fighter got a lot of love from BG3 too, as well, because people were seeing those superiority things and thinking, oh, this actually is a cool build that maybe I could use. But the other subclasses were kind of lackluster, so I can see how fighter needed a facelift.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. All right. Are we done with the lightning round?
We're done with the class lightning round. I don't know if you wanted to say anything about the races / species. I feel like we need to say something on it.
Well, I mean, we're also going to talk about lineages in the deep dive too.
I think the big thing is that since species now do not have anything like ability modifiers, that all counts on your background now. All of that is in your background. Love it or hate it.
Yeah. That was a deep sigh.
I mean, I'm okay with the backgrounds. I just don't feel like it should be the end all be all of your abilities. I think it stripped away some of the nicer nuances of picking a species in the first place. But I understand not wanting to give preferential treatment to, you know, all elves or wizards or or other sorts of stereotypical things that we've been doing with species up until this point.
I was going to say, I think the bigger concern is, elves are unilaterally smarter than dwarves. That's just a given. We all know that to be true, which is some, let's say, troubling ways to look at things.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, how about we do this? Because we're at like an hour and 10 minutes or more. Let's call it there, and then any other lightning round stuff we can do in deep dives, and maybe even if it's just like a quick 5-minute thing that we do.
How would I get access to a deep dive?
Well, I'm glad you asked. Go to patreon.com/goblins growlers, because somebody bought, or didn't buy, but they claimed the Goblins and Growlers URL for that. His name was Brandon Dingus, and he forgot how to access it. So now our Patreon is Goblins Growlers. Follow the link in our link tree to get there. In addition to 2 to 3 GGP deep dives per episode that come out in video and audio form, you also get early access to the video version of the podcast. And the plan going forward is to give early access to the audio version of the podcast as well. We're also working on a bunch of different stuff to sort of reboot the Patreon, including access to a lot of our original adventures, dev diaries for our publishing efforts and things like that, and a handful of other fun things. So please go check it out.
Maybe even our character sheet, where you can see that we did it first before it was cool.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Josh, what else do they need to know aside from that?
Well, of course, as always, they should telephone, telegraph, tell a friend about the Goblins and Growlers podcast, because word of mouth is the best way to spread the news about the Goblins and Growlers podcast. The good news.
And it's the best Ludicrous album.
Oh, I thought I'd missed something about the business. I was like, what? I thought I got everything. Folks should check out our sister podcast, Quid Pro Roll, where Brandon plays an over-the-hill professional wrestler named, what is it? It's Charles Gravy Boat Barnes.
Only been doing the podcast for 6 years, Josh.
I say Gravy Boat so exclusively that I have to think about what his first name really is. And I played the half-elf rogue Soledar Vakis, who is very edgy some of the time and just generally not good at people. And then you should check out our link tree, linktr.ee/goblins and growlers on that one, isn't it?
Yes.
And that is where you can find all of our social media, our website, as well as the subscription link for the newsletter that Brandon releases monthly, which the last one had a read time of 3.5 minutes estimated.
Wow.
I read slow, and that was pretty accurate for me. So it's not a big commitment. It's not going to be like you're getting constant bombardment from emails of Brandon being like, hey, also check out this TTRPG news and this and this. No, it's only distilled down to the finest points of TTRPG news, indie games, and things that we've been up to lately.
Yeah, it is an informational newsletter, though in full disclosure, occasionally I will post a link to some product that we're selling on our website or something like that. But that is not the sole purpose of the email. That is a support part of the email.
We want
the grift is just a feature.
Look, hustle culture demands that we occasionally sell things.
Yeah, be thankful I'm not hustle posting on LinkedIn about this.
Ugh.
Yeah. I fired all my employees yesterday. Here's the lesson I learned about management. Can't stand those guys.
God.
Yeah.
I can't think of anything else, and I don't have access to our banners list, which is what I usually use to cheat.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I think you gotta... Oh, join the Discord.
Yeah, bit.ly/goblin Discord.
Yeah. Join that and talk with us so you can bust on WotC and we'll read it on the air. Also, don't forget, WotC, please send us that book for review.
Oh, no.
All right. Well, for all the patrons, we'll see you on the deep dive. And thanks, Inver, for being here and sharing both your praise and vitriol of everything in the new PHB.
Hey, yeah, I'm Inver, and you can check me out at Inverlock on my social medias. Or don't. It's cool. It's whatever. I'm also on the Discord. You can say hi there.
All right. We'll see everybody later.
Bye, y'all.
If you like tabletop games like Dungeons and Dragons, you probably love thinking about your character's stats, and one way or another, taking a chance on your probability of success or failure. Underdog Fantasy lets you have that same experience with your favorite sports ball players.
With Underdog Fantasy, you can draft your lineup and build your adventuring party. Every pick'em entry could mean the difference between victory and defeat, and you don't get bardic inspiration here. Whether you're a veteran player or a newbie, Underdog Fantasy has the perfect contest for you.
They've got quests for every type of player, whether you're into football, basketball, baseball, and many other sports. You can enter its daily contests, pick'em contests, or dive into a season-long campaign with no salary caps and no long-term commitments. Just draft, strategize, and let the games begin.
So head to underdogfantasy.com or download the app and sign up with the promo code MCA. That's the acronym May Contain Action to start your adventure today and claim your special pick and first-time deposit offer of up to $250 in bonus cash. Underdog Fantasy is where underdogs become legends.
Participants must be 18 or older, 21 or older in Massachusetts and Arizona, 19 or older in Alabama and Nebraska, and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. If you or a loved one are concerned with your play, call 1-800-GAMBLER, that's 1-800-426-2537, or visit www.ncpgambling.org. In Arizona, you can call 1-800-NEXT-STEP, that's 1-800-639-8783, or text Next Step to 53342. In New York, call the 24/7 Hope line at 1-877-8-HOPE-NY, or text HOPE-NY 467-369.